Welcome to the latest edition of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hey, we're going back to Detroit and Indianapolis. All those great wrestlers from back then. The Noble Sheik, Bobo Brazil, Mark Lewin, the Blackjacks with Bobby Heenan with Nick Bockwinkel, and Bobo Brazil. And Scott Steiner? Really? Scott Steiner? Well, was he in diapers? Anyway, it's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Doesn't everybody like to be pampered, fella? Hi, everybody. It's Bob Smith once again, formerly with all those wrestling magazines. And this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. How's everybody doing? We got a long interview with one of wrestling's legendary announcers, Terry Sullivan, who announced for both the Sheik's Big Time Wrestling and Dick the Bruiser's Bruiser Bedlam, sometimes known as the World Wrestling Association. And I got to tell you, this guy is a treasure trove of information. And the reason I'm focusing on this particular person today, in addition to him being a great classic old school announcer, is that around 1986, there was an unbelievable revival of what I considered an almost dead federation. They didn't have a whole lot in terms of stars, and they weren't drawing, and the arenas start getting smaller and smaller. But the WWA and Bruiser Bedlam made a huge comeback, thanks to Terry, a young Scott Steiner, Dick the Bruiser, and oddly enough, a fellow you may not have heard of, Dr. Jerry Graham Jr., who is the biggest genius that not enough people have seen. So enough of my yakking. Let's get to Terry Sullivan and find out about the greatest comeback of a federation I consider in wrestling history. Well, I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to introduce one of the great wrestling announcers from the 70s and 80s, in my estimation. He worked for Big Time Wrestling. Of course, that was the Sheik's Federation. And later on, the classic show Bruiser Bedlam and the WWA. How about it? Here we got Terry Sullivan. Terry, thank you for being here so much.
Hey, thank you, Bob. I appreciate you having me. It's an honor to be working with you.
Oh, thanks. Well, I remember when I worked for PWI, we had WWA ratings in every issue.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I remember that.
We did. The Inside Wrestling and the Wrestler, and anything with 2 pages had the WWA ratings in it.
The tag teams and
Yeah. But I don't remember we covering you all that much. Of course, I started in 88.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the waning period, I guess, for the WWA at that point. Because I understand they closed in 89.
Well, I think it was in the like 91 or 92, honestly.
It went that far. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll have to double check. It's been a while.
Because I know we did things on the Great Wojo, who was the champion throughout the late 80s.
Right.
And a genuinely tough guy. I mean, that's about the roughest man I've ever seen in wrestling. He was tough.
Yeah, he was, truly.
Were the promotions really true? Did he really take on fans?
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me about that. That's the most unique thing I ever heard. I don't know how state athletic commissions would allow that, but explain how that went around.
Well, at that point in time, the Michigan State Athletic Commission wasn't really enforcing the rules too much. If there were, people signed a release, they let them in, and they legitimately offered, I think, $10,000 to anybody who could last 5 minutes with him. And, Wojo was just so adept at taking people, and many of whom had a little libation, shall we say, the match, and had their beer muscles flexed. And but Wojo could have hooked them. I mean, I don't know if he was the traditional Lou Thez kind of a hooker, but he could have gotten them, 100,000 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was a real successful little promotional tool they used.
I guess so, because it did make headlines. I'll tell you that much back in the day. So,
It was a good thing to get our name in the paper, a good hook.
Yeah. And of course, in that era, we're talking mid 80s, the WWF had gone national. And it must have been so hard for every independent, I'll call them independents for lack of a better term, but regional is a better word, for the regional federations to keep going. I mean, all the talent was being pilfered here and there, and budgets were budgets, and arenas were arenas, and it had to get tougher and tougher as time went on.
Yeah. Well, as you know, the WWA evolved from Bruiser's promotion. Well, they were one and the same, actually.
Right.
As you alluded to, Bruiser was dying out in Indianapolis, in the Indiana area. He was down to not really having anywhere near the star quality that he had even 5 years or 6 years before. So there wasn't much happening there. You're absolutely right. But we had a nice little deal with Past TV in Detroit. Got on there, recorded it at a place called the Premier Center, which was beautiful, and were able to bring in some decent wrestlers. The Iron Sheik came in, Cousin Junior, when he was still relatively hot and fresh off the WWE or F, whatever it was then. Scott Steiner, oh my gosh, he was he was trained by Dr. Jerry Graham, at least in part by Dr. Jerry Graham, the guy who engineered all of the stuff with the Premier Center and the deal with Past TV, got us our show on a station there. But yeah, Scott was so good. I mean, I saw him in his second match and I think, wow, this guy, if he sticks with it, is going to go so far, because he had the collegiate background, but he had the professional mentality.
Mm-hmm. That he certainly did. We all know what happened to him later on.
Yeah.
So let's do a few chronological things. I love your story about how you got the job with Big Time Wrestling. Would you recant that for us? Because I guess you just kind of asked. Is that really how you got in there, or how did it work?
More or less. I sort of made a pest of myself, but I don't believe how forward I was in terms of going up to total strangers like wrestlers and wrestlers' wives and talking to them, bugging them, if you will. And I was the friend of the wrestlers' wives, actually. And that was a very, very smart move on my part, because where the wrestlers' wives sit, the wrestlers come out. And when they talk to their wives, well, they're sort of talking to you too. So yeah, got to know him. One was Guy Mitchell, the Stomper. Went on to be Jerry Valiant in the WWW whatever at that point. But yeah, I got to know people. I got to know the promoter in Toledo, Martino Angelo. He started giving me comps to get me in the back door, and he introduced me to Les Ruffin, who was the promoter in Cincinnati, an old-time worker from the 40s and 50s who had been part of the office with Barnett in Indianapolis and had now moved to Cincinnati. And when Angelo introduced me to Les Ruffin, Les started putting some words in with the Sheik. As I was going to college at that point in Cincinnati, and did get to know Les and become really friendly with him, hang out at the bar with all the wrestlers, where they, of course, didn't want me anywhere near, but hey, that's what I do. And so Les really got the ball rolling for me. And the first time I met the Sheik was outside of the Cincinnati Gardens. At that time, Sheik had a purple Lincoln Continental with a white rag, not a rag top, but a white top and white interior, a thing of beauty. And he was sitting in the purple Cadillac. Big Jess Ortega was driving at that point in time. And he said, I hear you want to announce for me. I'm not going to try to do an impression of him, but
right.
I hear you want to announce for me. And I said, yes. And, I was sure he was going to throw a ball of fire at me. This was really, to me, an incredible moment, a life-changing moment, the beginning of the culmination of a dream. And I hear you want to announce for me. Yeah. He says, well, get yourself a tux. I'll pay for it. Show up at the Cobo Arena in a couple of weeks. We're going to do TV, and we'll see how you do. And by the way, if you tell anybody you talk to me, I'm going to tear your tongue out.
Whoa. But you were hired.
Yeah.
Hired. And it's a skill and a thing that you did for a long time to come after that. And I got to tell you, I really liked your announcing style. While you were watching the most violent wrestler in wrestling history, you kept your cool, and I really appreciated that. It kind of reminded me of Gordon Soley a little bit, in that you weren't screaming and getting histrionic just because things were happening in the ring that were crazy.
Yeah. It just wasn't my style. I mean, I can do that, and I've done a few things lately where that's sort of what they want. And I can sort of do that, and I shoot my voice after an hour or so. But yeah, I think it should be presented more as serious, because that's the way, that was the whole mentality.
Yes.
Backstage at that time was, this is serious stuff. And I tried to present it as a, like Soley did, as sort of a legitimate sports endeavor.
Yes, and that was the mindset of, well, every wrestling federation back then. It was a different way of thinking. It was a closed shop, shall we say?
Right. Oh yeah. And speaking of that, I was lucky to get in. One of the, somebody who had no relatives in the business and nothing other than a very casual association with some of these folks, and I still got in.
I felt the same way when I got my job with PWI, which will not let me go after all these years. People remember me from that stuff.
Well, sure.
I was only with the magazine for about 6 years, and it just won't let me go.
Yeah, you and Dan Shockett, right? Who could forget?
Actually, Dan was gone by that point. Replaced by Eddie Elner, but the rest of the crew was all there, and I was so shocked to get hired. I can't even tell you, because I had worked with Mike Tyson, the boxer.
Did you?
Yeah, I'm from Catskill, New York, originally, where he trained.
Oh,
and that was my hometown paper, and I got a job with my hometown paper. And the next thing I know, I'm covering his career, the first 20 fights or so.
Oh,
and man. I can tell you, Mike Tyson made my career. Because if I didn't have clips to send to that publishing company, I don't think I ever would have been hired.
Yeah, isn't that something?
So I had a lot of wrestling knowledge, but by the same token, I think they were also publishing boxing magazines. I think they looked at me as like the perfect candidate, and I got hired very quickly. So
wow.
So that's my story. It's all good fortune. Just like you, I think you never know what's going to happen, but you did something that's a really important thing. You asked.
Oh yeah.
You have to ask, or you don't get.
Yeah. They had hired me for they all knew what I wanted to do. I mean, I was just about to. Let's see. I was in college when I first got hired, but I had been bugging them, hanging around for several years before that. So most of them who knew me knew that I was going to college and that I was taking communication, and they all knew what I wanted to do. And as I got to know more guys like Tex McKenzie, for example, one of the friendliest guys, and just so outgoing and charismatic, and such a nice guy. And he took me under his wing a little bit. The Stomper, Guy Mitchell, was another one. And that they put in words. I'm sure.
That's awesome. That's really
when
great.
I started, I worked for Mike Lauren, who many people might know as the Sheik's bodyguard. And he's the guy that was near ringside pretty much all the Sheik's matches, even in Japan. And he was running some towns, Mansfield and Sandusky, Ohio specifically. They each ran every other week on a Friday night. And I'd drive up from Cincinnati and ring announce for Mike. But the Sheik didn't go to those small towns usually. So the first time I met him was later on one day when I met him there in Cincinnati.
It's just amazing how Dame Fortune smiles upon us sometimes, If you meet the right people, they can do so much for you.
Yeah.
I want to take it now because we all know of your great work in Detroit. And by the way, you YouTube fans, not only do I want you to look for Terry and the old Detroit and Indianapolis clips, I want you to look for this amazing thing you've been doing with Rox TV and Big Time International Wrestling. Those biography shows are awesome. They're tremendous. You and Dave Drayson, awesome, man. I got to tell you, I love them. I hyped them a couple shows ago. I want people to go out and discover those because they're so educational. I can't even put it into words. And it's the type of thing we need right now because I don't want, and the whole concept behind this show, this podcast, I don't want people to forget the old days, man. I think it's important that we learn from the old days.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind of you, because we think an awful lot about them. And some of the first ones were a little rough, but we got better as time went on. And Dave Drayson, Dave Brzezinski, and I have been friends for over 50 years at this point in time. And, there's nothing like sitting down and talking about wrestling with a good friend. And that's what we do. And we were both fortunate enough to actually be backstage, so to speak. Myself as the ring announcer, having contact and interactions with all the men and women of wrestling, and Dave as the official photographer for big time wrestling. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to put something out free. That was a big consideration. And essentially, the history as we saw it of Detroit wrestling in the 70s, because there's not really anything else out there like
right.
that.
Yeah. So that's why I think it's so vital. I mean, you even did a show on Cobo Hall itself. I mean, that's tremendous.
Yeah, right. We did one where we went to the Sheik's mansion in Williamston, Michigan, where his office was. And at the end, we visited his gravesite. He and Joyce, and at that time, both of his boys, or one of his boys, is buried there. But that was intensely emotional. It really was.
I'm sure it was. It had to be. So let us move ahead, because the focal point I'm making of this particular episode with you is the unbelievable revival of the WWA, which is something they never referred to it as on television, but I'm going to use that as it was still the World Wrestling Association.
Yeah.
And so thanks to Dave Dynasty on YouTube, I'm watching these shows. I'm trying to look at them in chronological order. And that federation was a smash success for many, many years. I mean, the Sheik would be in and out. You had Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher, Bobby Heenan, the Blackjacks, tons and tons of superstars there. And All-Star Championship Wrestling was the name of the show at one point.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, Sam Menaker, who everybody loved, I mean, he's irreplaceable. What a unique, special person he was in terms of the wrestling business and his ringside style. That old school, you shouldn't have done that. He would chastise the villains, and it was awesome. But then
I always thought and I hate to interrupt you, I always thought Sam was a poor man's Lord Layton.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because Lord Layton was the premier wrestling announcer in Detroit and had been a main eventer there for 20 years, continued to main event while hosting the TV show there. And 6'6", man, he would interview those guys and he wouldn't take any you-know-what from them.
Both in Detroit and Australia, because he did some commentary in Australia too. If he didn't like what the bad guy was, he'd walk up to the ring and smack the guy because he was still working, So that worked very well.
Yeah, it did.
Started a nice feud doing that.
I'm sorry I interrupted you. Back to Sam and the Bruiser.
No, anyway, so Sam was there, and then poof, he disappears. I don't know what had happened. I don't know why he left, but then a fellow that we all know from Glow, David McLean, did the announcing.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I consider that the low point in Indianapolis wrestling history, because not only was he a strident announcer, they were doing things that I didn't agree with ethically, like bringing in a fake Jerry Lawler. Huh?
Oh, right. Yeah, Gary. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I guess they didn't really believe in the local talent and decided to kind of cop things from different. They also had a manager named Creechman who had nothing to do with Eddie Creechman.
Right. Scott Romer. Yeah.
Yeah. So that smacks of desperation to me. What do you think?
Yeah, probably so. Bruiser might have been trying to not rib Jerry Lawler, but sort of send him a message of some type, because there was a lot of concern about Jerry Lawler. And I know there was in the Sheik's office. And from what I've heard, there was in the Bruiser's office too, that Jerry Lawler was somebody who, needed to be taken really, really seriously. And,
how so? As a promoter, as a talent, what do you mean by seriously?
As a threat to the existence maybe of, especially a Bruiser, because he was right on top of Bruiser's territory. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he was somebody that everybody wanted. Everybody was just sort of trying to feel out, and everybody wanted to get him on their side. And But of course, Bruiser wanted him nowhere around. So maybe that was the reason he brought in Gary Lawler, so I can make my own star.
Yeah.
Just conjecture.
Yeah. Well, I think they called him Jerry Lawler, but with a G.
Oh, did they? Okay.
I think they announced him as the Southern champion, Jerry the King Lawler. I mean, they weren't even. Yeah, they weren't even.
Oh, that is sleazy.
That's unethical. In a business where boundaries are stretched all the time. I took umbrage with that. I thought that was kind of lame.
That's a very Jack Pfeffer-ish.
Yes, exactly. Very good.
San Martino and Hobo, Brazil.
Oh, but Mark Tendler on the East Coast here used to run his little independent shows with the magnificent LaRocca. He would just the same thing. Yeah. He had Mick Foley worked for once and made him a Samoan. I mean, he would do anything in a high school gym.
That's really an insult to professional wrestling.
I agree. I shouldn't be done. Shouldn't even be broached. Shouldn't be done. So anyway, just some time passes, and here comes Terry Sullivan.
Yeah.
How'd you hook up with Bruiser?
Through Jerry Graham. Jerry had a promotion going in Toledo. I think we had Miller Beer as a sponsor at that point in time. And then the deal in Detroit came through. And part of the deal was to get Bruiser and see what essentially at the beginning, Jerry Graham's promotion in Toledo was, it was the WWA, but Bruiser really didn't have too much of a part in it. But then once we got the Detroit deal together, the two merged, came together. They wanted Bruiser on as the name because, do you know Bruiser's history in Detroit as a radio personality?
No, that voice?
Yeah, well, all for at least a dozen years, while Bruiser was off in Indianapolis, there was a radio station, the home of rock and roll, WRIF in Detroit. And the morning team was Jim Johnson and George Baer, big wrestling fans. And George Baer was an impressionist. And his most popular, and amazingly so popular impression was Dick the Bruiser. And he would do the Bruiser impression. And of course, Bruiser became sort of iconic through this impression in Detroit. The real Dick the Bruiser started doing commercials for WRIF as himself, and so he was sort of really iconic at that point in time. So he maintained a big name even when he wasn't wrestling there. So it was a good deal to get him together, put together the Bruiser Bedlam show. We had the Past TV, had put our show on Indianapolis, which I think was production-wise a definite improvement from what Indianapolis was doing. And us too in Toledo. We've been in a studio sometimes and in a bar. This is a little bit better.
Yeah, it was. As I'm following the lineage of the show, the ones that I could see, I thought that when it switched to Bruiser Bedlam, it looked more. Well, I'll tell you, whoever did the lighting did a superb job in the beginning because even if the place was a little smaller and maybe not quite full, you couldn't tell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the ring looked so good. So the Past thing didn't last, I think, maybe 8 months. And then the promotion continued, though, at some ice hockey arenas around Detroit.
Right.
And, I don't know what happened to sour the deal. I know they they were unhappy with Dick the Bruiser on commentary. It could be a little difficult to get Dick to respond, and I always looked at that as a failing on my part, as I tried to set him up, but sometimes I would throw him a line and there was just crickets. So I don't know. He started to loosen up a little bit as time went on. He became a little bit humorous when it was appropriate. And I think he got a little better then. Yeah.
It's funny, though, because I thought you two had a really good chemistry, especially the wraparounds at the beginning and end of the show. It kind of made it kind of homespun, like you guys were pals and you were just talking about the wrestling you both love. Right.
But listen to the commentary and see what you think.
Yes, I won't be critical because let's face it, Dick was getting on in years, right? I mean,
Yeah, but he was still a draw, and
Yes.
but they didn't want him on TV wrestling, and
Really?
that was something he wasn't really happy with. But he wrestled in the arenas. Another guy who we brought on for, I think he came in one time. We did two shows a night. Another guy they didn't want in the ring was Bobo Brazil.
They really didn't want these guys in the ring?
No, not at all.
But their names alone would draw people. I don't quite get that. Right? I mean, am I right or wrong?
You're right. And as the great Dr. Jerry Graham once told me, you're selling the sizzle, not the steak.
Right.
And but that was a huge insult to Bobo Brazil, and I took great offense at it personally. And then they put him out there as a manager, and I don't think he came back. Flying Fred Curry was in, been a huge star there, and could still go really well. But when he found out what they did with Bobo, he never came back.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump to the 84-ish time, 1984 or so, and I'm looking at the shows, and you had about 17 different hooded hangmen. Right. One was big and heavy set, and then he got thin out of nowhere, as you recall. You had Bulldog Don Kent, a good hand even to the end. I thought he maintained his professionalism throughout his career, even in those years. He was a legitimate rough, tough guy, and he looked at even more as he got older, I thought.
Yeah. He was excellent. What a mentor he was, and gave a lot of the younger guys a lot of great training. He'd train them during the match, and then he'd sit down with them after the match. But yeah, he was a really good guy, funny guy, heck of a sense of humor, always laughing. But he was a really, really solid pro in every single way.
And now also on that period, I don't want to put him down because he's one of the first wrestlers I ever saw working for Pedro Martinez in the early 70s. But you had Moose Sholok, right? And Moose, by the end there, let's face it, he could barely get in the ring. Am I right or wrong?
Oh, you're right. Yeah. The good poor Moose. I felt sorry for him. Coming all the way from Chicago for what couldn't have been more than $100, if that. But yeah, he still wanted to do it, and the people still responded well to him.
That's the thing. He was over. He was still over.
Yeah, the aura, the huge man, the 6'5", and coming out with, what was the Moosehead's name? I can't remember the.
Yes, he had a name. I don't remember it either. But I was amazed at his age. He could still get that gigantic thing in his head. Right? Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was so heavy then, and but he was a good draw. One of the great draws in his day as a heel or a face.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's how I remember him just doing the kielbasa thing.
Oh,
long before Mighty Igor, he was doing have some kielbasa. He was.
Oh, was he?
Yes, for Lisa Pedro. He kept trying to feed it to Ron Martinez on the old NWF shows from the Utica area, and he'd go, "No, I don't want." So anyway, also El Bracero, who looked exactly the same as he always had. Yes. He was remarkable.
Yeah. Have you seen pictures of him lately?
No.
Yeah. In fact, as we tape this, today is his birthday, and he's still slim and trim. He's got the gray hair going now, but he still looks great.
Some guys got the gift, don't they? It's amazing.
The interesting thing was he was this area's first this area's introduction to lucha libre. So this was like amazing and astounding to see how nimble and acrobatic, if you will, he was with these moves.
Yeah, he could go. He was a perfect early card guy.
Yeah.
Like I don't. Here's the thing. Here's the thing about wrestling that I never understood, because the opening match can set a tone for the rest of your card. I thought he was a spectacular opening match guy.
Yeah.
Because it got the fans into it right away.
You got to open hot.
Yeah. He was perfect for that. Like a Mike Pappas type, It was like, those guys are invaluable. Yeah. Johnny Rods, guys from that era who could entertain from the minute the bell rang in the beginning of the show.
Knew exactly how to get the people in their hands. Al Costello, even as he aged, was another one who perfect for something like that. He was so adaptable and could literally keep the crowd in the palm of his hand.
Yes, he could. He's a great heel too. My gosh.
Oh yeah,
Oh
gee.
man. All right, so now we're moving on a little bit in time, and you guys had a white bread all American kid named Chris Carter,
Oh yeah.
right? And
Uh-huh.
I'm watching these shows. I remember I'm trying to go in chronological order, and I'm watching. I'm going, all right, okay, does
Yeah.
this thing. But when he turned heel, one of the great metamorphoses I've ever seen, and part of the focal point of the revival of what's about to happen. Do you agree with that? He was fantastic as a heel.
Yeah, he really was. He really came into his own. They say it's an extension of your own personality.
Mm-hmm.
No, he's a good friend of mine. In fact, I was just texting him not too long ago, and I always thought that too. Yeah, that's a great observation. He really blossomed.
Yeah.
And
You know what? It reminds me in a small way of Larry Zabisco when he did the same
yeah,
thing.
same type of a personality that
What,
just smart ass,
he was
arrogant.
in the beginning, he barely said anything, Zabisco. He would just mumble, I'm going to do my
Yeah,
best. And after he attacked Sammartino, he became this snarky, mean spirited punk.
yeah, yeah,
And you couldn't believe it was the same guy he was before.
yeah.
And so I think that Chris Carter did that too. He did the exact same thing. He put a pair of glasses on. He started to do some commentary with you on the wraparound shows. And it
Yep.
was spectacular, man. It was a whole different flavor.
Well, I'm going to tell him this, and I know he will truly appreciate it. Yeah, but he was always you could always count on him in whatever role he had.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, I want to talk to you about wrestling's unheralded genius, Dr. Jerry Graham Jr.
Oh yes, the man with all the degrees, so many degrees.
But am I right or wrong? The man could talk like as good as anybody. I don't understand. I know that WWF brought him in for like 15 seconds at one point with a different name.
I'll tell you a story about that when you're done.
Okay, I don't understand why Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. wasn't a fixture in every federation in wrestling. He was real good, man. He was real good.
He was just that good.
Mm-hmm.
They brought him in for a taping really, really early on. In fact, I think it was the taping. It was in St. Louis that Gene Okerlund debuted on. And they gave him the name Mad Dog Manigoff. There was an old-time champion wrestler, Bobby Manigoff, another one.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, he wore the Montreal World title several times. But anyway, they gave him the name Mad Dog Manigoff. They put him with John Studd.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever the agent was, he doesn't remember who it was, might have been Gurria, might have even been Pat Patterson, said, go out to ringside and don't do anything. I said, are you kidding me? They just may as well told you to shoot yourself through the temple. What do you mean don't do anything? You're a manager. You got to holler and scream and blah, blah, blah. But no, he did what he was told and they never brought him back. But they did bring in some other managers pretty quickly after that. And I think the fix was in.
How can you look at a performer like that with the gift of gab they had and said, don't do anything? That's boggling my mind, man.
Yeah, because I think they they torpedoed him. Somebody just buried him because Vince didn't know him from the hole in the ground.
Right.
But Vince takes what do you remember about Mad Dog Manigoff, Vince? Thumbs down.
I'll never understand it. Never understand it because in front of the camera, he was the worst heel, the most loud, obnoxious guy. Then in comes, and he's managing Great Wojo.
Right.
Here comes Scott Steiner.
Yeah.
Boom. Boom.
Yeah.
How did you guys end up with a talent like Scott, and how did that all evolve? Because I'm telling you, the minute he walked in there, things started to change for the better, I thought.
Yeah. Somebody got in touch with Dr. Jerry Graham about training him because Jerry trained Wojo, and Wojo was a collegiate superstar. Rex Steiner was a collegiate superstar right up the road from Toledo there at the U of M. And I'm not sure exactly who it was that got him together with Dr. Jerry Graham, but Jerry trained him, and Scott worked for us then. And what a, I saw his second match, and I looked at that and I thought, holy cow, this, if he sticks with it, this guy is going to be amazing, because he just had this presence. He had the charisma, and the crowd was positive about him before they even seen him for a second, because he was such a good looking guy. He had everything, the build, the interviews sucked, but he had everything else.
Yeah. I mean, but that was an era where you had a Bob Backlund as a champion. He could barely put a sentence together. Yeah. It wasn't as important then as it is now, I think. As long as he could bring the goods in the ring.
Yeah.
And you needed a spectacular face at that point. You needed a good guy who you could wrap the federation around. And I think that was a brilliant move by you. You pushed him right away. I mean, there's no question about it.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it was a good, young, good-looking baby face was just what they needed. As aside from like somebody like Carter, who'd already been up and down and up and down, you need new talent,
right?
And this was a real hit.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into the real meat of what I think is the A1 thing that I thought was the most incredible revival of a federation I have ever seen. And I'm not blowing smoke at you. So somehow Dr. Graham turns good after a leg injury. Am I right?
Car accident.
Was that legit?
Well, wait a minute. It was a legitimate car accident.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. He was really sick. I think they might have. I think there might have been some creative liberties taken, which might have
a little bit
led to Chris Carter being cut the brake lines or something like that.
Oh gosh! All right, okay.
I forget, but it was a legitimate car crash, and he was in the hospital for quite a long time. And you remember the hospital bit we did?
I never saw that. No,
never saw that. That's coming up. We did an interview live in the hospital, St. Vincent's Hospital in Toledo, and did a little interview with Jerry in his hospital bed, just selling the legitimacy of this whole thing. And I think that was another great touch, because nobody was doing interviews away from the studio at that point in time.
And particularly if it's a legit thing. I mean, that's rare.
Yeah.
I mean, you can cob that up, but if it's real, that brings a whole new sense of, realism to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the same time, we've got Chris Carter really making his name for himself as a jerk, right? Mm-hmm. Teaming with Muhammad Saad and all this other stuff that's going on. And I take you to a match I saw on the videotape Wrestling's Bloodiest Battles, which was released. Yeah. And a match where at the end of the bout, a hobbled Graham either is pulled into the ring and they beat the living crap out of him. Mm-hmm. They beat his leg. They take the cast off his leg and beat him with the cast. And he's bleeding profusely.
Oh, yeah.
And the heat is incredible. It's 1986 or whatever it was, or 88, and it looks like there's going to be a riot in the arena. I don't know if you felt that way at the time, but it felt like, Oxbaker, Ernie Ladd type of thing. Yeah. It's like, I'm thinking of the riots of that time period. Riots were rare, but those fans were mad. That was legitimate heat. And dude, that's impossible in 1986. With the WWE breathing down your necks. Yeah. You guys looked great at that point. Well, that's as good as a revival of a wrestling federation as I have ever seen, considering where you were 3 or 4 years before that to that point. Wow, man. You knocked me out. Absolutely knocked me out.
You got to give credit where it's due. The booker was Jerry Graham. Mm-hmm. And, he didn't do it all by himself. I mean, he always entertained input, but he was the genius.
It was good stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why I want my listeners to go on YouTube, find these matches, find these videotapes, find the Rocks TV series that you've done, and start to enjoy, if they've never seen it, Indianapolis wrestling, Detroit wrestling, anything you were involved with, because I don't think enough people have seen it, and I want more people to get into it. I know it's decades later. You won't make any money from it or anything like that, but I want your legacy to live on through today's younger fans who may be listening to the show.
I just wish there were more of it. But I do appreciate it though, very, very much. Very kind.
No, it's really true. I mean, I've been around the business for 35 years, whatever it is. I got away from it. It keeps pulling me back in. Every time I leave, somebody gives me a phone call.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's true. It's true. It's like I worked for WCW for a while, but nobody knows it because nobody read their magazine. But I worked for them after I left PWI and a bunch of other magazines. And I just got off of another podcast. So I got a call after 30 years, and now I started my own.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is that I want my goal in this podcast is to have people discover the excitement. People think, oh, the old school wrestlers, they move so slow. They never left their feet, la-di-da-di-da. There's some real excitement out there on those old tapes and some really, really creative things that the old timers came up with too.
Yeah. I mean, it's the foundation for what we're watching today, and it has been quite an evolution. But I think it's very instructive to go back and look at the roots, especially for those who might aspire to be wrestlers. To not only go back and watch your forefathers, but also listen to the ones that are still around today, because they do know what they're talking about. I've been in so many dressing rooms where one time Lou Thez was a guy. They sit by themselves because nobody will talk to them.
I just did a bonus show about Memphis, and as we all know, Jerry Jarrett just left us.
Yeah,
that is one less voice that we have to educate.
Yeah,
right, to educate, to keep the psychology of wrestling that lasted for over 50 years alive. And I think we need people like me, people like you. We need to keep speaking up and letting people know about the old school wrestling and have them enjoy it and learn from it, so that the techniques and the psychology of wrestling that kept the arenas buzzing for decades continues on into the future. And I'm not talking about WWE or anything like that. I'm just saying that the thing that bothers me about current wrestling is that a lot of the bookers and a lot of the creative people behind it seem to have absolutely no knowledge of stuff that goes back farther than 6 months. And that bothers me.
Yeah. I agree. There's really not enough opportunity by the current big ones to recognize the people who are, especially the ones who are still around. Initially when AEW started, they brought in some of the locals. When they would go to a different town, they'd show them in the audience. I remember seeing Baron Von Roski and a few others when they were in Minneapolis, and but they just don't do enough of paying tribute to the people who made them.
I agree. You can't pay tribute enough, because without them, we all wouldn't be here now.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't, the kids wouldn't be here now.
Yeah.
So how long did you stay with the WWA/Bruiser? When did you leave there?
I think about 3 years total, maybe 4. And at the time, I was just involved in so many different things that something had to give. And unfortunately, that was it. But I missed seeing Wojo against Leon Spinks. That was the last set of promos I did.
Wow. Holy smokes. That's right. I remember that now. Now that you bring that up, I remember that coming about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now, man?
Now I am sort of kind of retired.
I'm not.
I guess not.
Yeah.
I do what I want to do. I worked for a small promotion here in Toledo that I liked a lot, that had the same philosophy that you and I do about the old school kind of stuff. It was an old school type promotion, Powerbomb Wrestling. COVID did that one in. And I don't think it's going to come back unless there's a rich benefactor. I worked for a promotion, the International Big Time Wrestling in Detroit, for a couple of years, and pretty much COVID did it in also. You know about Jarrett Parsons?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Wrestling Classics, Wrestling Legends. Mm-hmm. I'm doing some stuff on them. We've done 2 with DVDs. I don't think they're going to do DVDs anymore. It'll all be streaming.
Yeah.
But we've done 2 in-depth or 2 lengthy treatments of big time wrestling from back in the day. I think they want to. They think they've got enough material that maybe we can get like 6 2 or 3 hour programs out of it.
Wow.
I might be doing a few other little things with them.
Well, that's great. Well,
Yeah.
listen, whatever you have going on, please keep me in touch and let me know, and I'll let the listeners know, because we love you, man. You did a fantastic job. You were a huge part of wrestling history at a time when wrestling was red hot. I mean,
Yeah.
to join big time wrestling at the time when you did is quite the achievement, man.
Oh, tell me.
So I just want to say thank you, not only for being here now, but for all the memories and all the excitement that you brought to us. So thank you so much.
And thank you, because you brought a lot of the same to people, but I appreciate it.
My pleasure entirely. That's Terry Sullivan, everybody. Thanks again, Terry. Hey, are you in the mood for something fun to do with your family? Get together for a fun and exciting time bowling at Harold Lanes in New Hyde Park, New York. Harold Lanes brings back the nostalgic atmosphere of bowling along with its fantastic cafe and bar selections. The food is not your typical bowling alley offerings. Take it from me. That's the truth. The food is delicious. Harold Lanes also offers adult and junior leagues as well as coaching classes for the kids. The kids' birthday parties, fundraisers, and adult parties are always a huge hit. Reasonably priced and conveniently located at 465 Herricks Road in New Hyde Park, New York, Harold Lanes is open 7 days a week, 10 a.m. to midnight. You need more information? Give them a call at 516-741-8022. That's 516-741-8022 for Harold Lanes in New Hyde Park, New York. Isn't Terry Sullivan great? He's still got that smooth melodic voice. Such an honor to speak with him. It really was. Now I want to go over a couple of things. Number one, in our next edition, I want to read some listener comments that I've been accumulating over the past few weeks. So I'll put them on next week. We'll have another guest for you. We're lining it up right now. And in case you don't know, and I didn't promote it, I was feeling kind of blue a couple days ago, Monday, and I recorded and immediately published a bonus episode of the Outdated Wrestling Hour, all about my experiences with Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett. And if you'd like, take a listen to that. It's kind of a personal remembrance, tribute, whatever you want to call it. I had to get it off my chest. I felt, is it really my place to do such a thing? But I said, what the heck? Let people know how you feel about them. And there's Memphis wrestling was just about as good as it gets in my eyes, especially that Channel 5 studio show. Best studio show in the history of wrestling television. So we've got a lot in store for you. A lot of things coming up. My name's Bob Smith, and this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Our opening and closing theme is Boogie Party by Kevin MacLeod. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. I love the theme of the show. I just think it matches the whole format. Please write to us, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Please go to your local podcast app and give us a nice review or subscribe to us if you would. We'd really appreciate it. Things are going along swimmingly, and it's all thanks to all of you. I'm amazed. I'm thrilled. I love you. This has been a wonderful experiment. I don't regret doing it for a second. And we have a lot more cool stuff coming up in future episodes. I promise you. And remember, we publish every Friday now, so look for us. So as I leave you, I'll leave you with the words of the great Sam Menaker, who was a WWA announcer for as long as I can remember. And remember his magic words. Lamphora High School, it's air-cooled.